I'm Wendy Brockman. Welcome to Denver Decides. Denver Decides is a community partnership dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters in Denver, Interneighborhood Cooperation, Historic Denver, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. The forum is also sponsored by the Alamo Placida Neighborhood Association, Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods, the Golden Triangle Creative District, and Uptown on the Hill. We also want to thank the staff and management at the Denver Art Museum for their assistance and cooperation. This forum is taking place at the Sharp Auditorium here at the Denver Art Museum. Today we are presenting a candidate forum in anticipation of the municipal election coming up on Tuesday, May 7th. Among other offices, this election includes the candidates vying to represent the city as one of two at-large members of Denver City Council. The at-large members of Denver City Council represent the entire city of Denver. Our format is a pretty standard one. The candidates will have timed opening and closing statements. That will be followed by rounds of questions that have been submitted by the organizers and sponsors of the forum. Since we have a time limit, we may not get to all of those questions, but the ones we ask have to be answered by all of the candidates, and all the responses will be timed. Our timers are out front so candidates can see how they're doing on time. All right, so let's begin by meeting the candidates vying to represent you as one of two City Council at-large members. The candidates are seated left to right facing the audience in order that their names will appear on the May ballot. So beginning at my right is Jesse LaShawn Paris. Seated next to him is Johnny Hayes. Then we have Deborah Ortega, Tony Pigford, Lynn Langdon, I beg your pardon, and Robin Kniech. Welcome to the Candidates Forum, everyone. Let's welcome them. Thank you. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from each of the 6 candidates, and we'll proceed in ballot order with these statements. So once again, starting on my right, we're going to begin with Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Okay, good evening. My name is Jesse Paris. I'm representing for Black Star Action Movement for Self-Defense, Denver Homeless Out Loud, and Positive Action Commitment for Social Change. I'm a long-term Denver native. I've been a native of Denver for the past 30 years. I've lived in the northeast section of Denver, majority of that time, and I'm what you consider a community activist. I do a lot of work in the community, especially around the homeless and Black and brown communities. Thank you.
Jesse LaShawn. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm out of order here. Let's hear from Johnny Hayes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Johnny Hayes. I am a father of 2 wonderful children. I am an historian, if you couldn't tell by looking at my face. I'm a volunteer in my community. I have a BFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York. I work in the arts and film and music industry as a writer, director, painter, and musician. I am an advocate for the deaf community. I would like to see the bridging of the hearing community and the deaf community brought to the city of Denver. That's very important to me. The homeless crisis is another very important issue to me. I would like to encourage the arts. I'm very happy we're here at the Art Museum doing this forum right now. I'd like to encourage the film industry to thrive in Denver. I'm a creative thinker, and I'm thinking of creative solutions to solve a lot of Denver's problems here. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for having us.
And now a 1-minute opening statement from Deborah Ortega.
Good evening. I first want to thank all of our District 10 RNOs, League of Women Voters, INC, Historic Denver, and Denver Decides Channel 8 for hosting this tonight. I have dedicated my adult life in serving the people of Denver. I'm committed to a fair and equitable Denver that prioritizes the delivery of our city services before adding new programs to our city budget. And obviously, the need for affordable housing is also very important to making sure that we have different price points of housing that don't exist in our market today for many people who are struggling to live in our city. Council must continue to thoroughly review the issues that come before us and not be seen as rubber stamping the issues that are oftentimes brought before us by the administration. I will continue to listen, advocate, collaborate to protect
All right,
the
your
public
time is up,
trust.
Ms. Ortega. Apologize.
Thank you.
A 1-minute opening statement now from Tony Pigford.
Good evening. I'm grateful to be here. Thanks to everyone who helped put this forum on. My name is Tony Pigford. I'm a fourth-generation Denverite and a third-generation product of Denver Public Schools. I come from a long line of educators, entrepreneurs, and social justice champions. For the last 100 years, me and my family have been working hard to shape our city. For the last decade, I've worked in the youth leadership development and education space. I'm the founding dean of students at the only all-boys public middle school in the region. I'm running for Denver City Council at large because we need a new brand of leadership in Denver. We need proactive leaders that will have a sense of urgency, that will treat our crisis-level issues as emergencies, and also we need leaders that have a sense of possibility because we have the opportunity to make Denver the most vibrant, sustainable, and just city in the nation. My name is Tony Pigford, and I hope to be one of your next Denver City at-large representatives. Thank you so much.
Next, let's hear from Lynn Langdon.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I'm from Colorado, and the majority of my family lives in Colorado. I am passionate and excited to serve Denver residents and to see that we move into a bright, solid future as a city. I've worked internationally and interculturally in major cities around the world. I've held positions and received awards for my leadership abilities and my optimism. And all of these things have provided me with a vast experience of being able to work productively with large groups of people who have different priorities, beliefs, and backgrounds towards common goals. My strengths lie in my ability to connect with people, to hear and validate your concerns, and in knowing how to motivate individuals towards productive and proactive change. I'm not afraid to stand up against the status quo and or initiate new action and out-of-the-box thinking when called for. Thank you so much.
And now an opening statement from Robin Kinich.
Thank you. I'm Robin Kinich, and it's been my honor to be your partner and champion as your councilwoman. I live up in Northeast Park Hill with my wife and my son, who turned 10 yesterday. I began my career working on behalf of those women being empowered from violence and other backgrounds. And then I continued my work with community coalitions, working to ensure that growth had a conscience with jobs, affordable housing, and environmental standards. As your councilwoman, I led the creation of the first ever fee on development to fund thousands of affordable homes across this city, along with other funding sources. And I've sponsored other policies that are helping thousands more families stay in their homes and neighborhoods. The collaboration with the communities that are impacted most is at the core of my work, whether it's working to transform a brownfield into an open space in Globeville, whether it's working to ensure that more immigrant and LGBTQ families feel safe in our city, or giving 8,000 service workers a raise. I'm running for re-election to grow my impact.
Thank you, Ms. Kinich. I'm sorry to cut you off. Your
Thank
time
you.
is up. Now the first of our submitted questions for the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer, and we're going to start in reverse order from the opening statement. So we're going to begin with Robin Kinich. Here's the first question. What might you say to developers who propose projects that could bring in significant short-term money but might not align with the long-term vision and needs of the city?
Well, I have said no on several occasions, and I can give you several examples. The 41st and Fox area, where I-25 and I-70 meet, is proposed for a major redevelopment. And the developer who proposed that site entered into negotiations with the city over a housing agreement that had them paying more than the standard fee, but did not guarantee the creation of any housing on the site. The plan made no less than 20 references to this site needing to be inclusive to those of all incomes, and when it didn't include it, I voted no. In the process of voting no, however, I called the attention of the city to the flawed process in which this agreement was negotiated and the fact that it ignored the plans. It created a brand new conversation between the housing department and the community planning and development department that then, in a later development, the Elitch project, resulted in a far more inclusive negotiation, resulting in 15% affordable housing on site. So I either say provide the equity, or my answer's no.
Same question for Lynn Langdon.
I completely agree. I have not been serving as a council member, so I haven't had this experience come across my table, but I would definitely say no.
Tony Pigford.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What might you say to developers who propose projects that could bring in significant short-term money but might not align with the long-term vision and needs of the city?
I'd ask them to look for another city to do business in. I think that, unfortunately, that's not what's been asked of them. Our city has been sold to the highest bidder. That's what's been happening. We've had wealth extraction, and the reason we have, mass inequity in a broken housing market is because we haven't collectively, as a city council, stood up to those development interests. So I would ask them to look elsewhere. I would work with developers who wanted to bring a long-term, not only financial benefit, but a social benefit, so that they would bring more equity and vibrancy to the city of Denver. Thank you.
Same question, Deborah Ortega.
So I have served on the board of a nonprofit housing development organization that has been building affordable housing in our city for over 35 years. And our nonprofits have played a viable role in making sure that we have housing for people who are struggling to stay in this city. We need to continue to prioritize that. But for developers who are looking to do large developments, one of the things that we no longer do is have city council play a major role in looking at the details that we used to. And we need to take a step back and look at comprehensive planning, because we have over 500 acres scheduled to come to our city, and we need to make sure that we're looking at that impact to the adjacent neighborhoods and that we will be upfront in addressing gentrification and displacement.
All right, Johnny Hayes, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think we're all looking for long-term solutions to our city's problems. And with development and the rapid growth that we're having here, we really want something that's sustainable and forward-thinking in that area. So I wouldn't be in favor of any short-term developers, even if it is profitable to the economy, if it has a negative or adverse effect to the Denver community. With developing, what I would like to see and like to encourage is more community cooperation within developers. We're a city that is growing at such a high rate that we need to improve within our infrastructures and our housing, obviously. So for me, I would want to make sure that developers enhance the community, that the community has a say in what's going to be developed in their neighborhood and how it's going to be developed, what's placed there, and also get the community involved so that it can create jobs and just benefit the community. So for me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Same question to Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Jesse Paris, hello. I would stand up to developers and tell them that we need to make sure all future developments have 0 to 30% AMI housing. I'm running for poor and disenfranchised communities that have been gentrified, that have been displaced and bought out of their neighborhoods. We need to literally put a "We are not for sale" sign on the city and let these developers know and these companies know that Denver is not for sale and that you cannot just run amok. So that's what I would do.
All right, our next question, we're going to begin with Lynn Langdon. Denver has experienced nearly unprecedented growth, and all indications are that it will continue. Tell us what Denver should look like in 20 years and how we get there.
Oh, I love that question because I actually believe that we should follow the role model of Quayside, Toronto. It's a smart city that's being established. They're implementing so many smart technologies and green resources. And I just really think that we need to look to futuristic cities like that. They're also, by the way, also experiencing the issues of low-income housing, providing enough. And by using a lot of proven green resources, they're able to get the building costs down for builders to be able to provide that. I just think it's a very exciting time. I think that we can bring Denver into a really great future. Thank you.
Same question now for Tony Pickford.
Thank you. There's some things in the past that I would like to be sure that we're there 20 years from now. My father was a small business owner. My mother was an educator in Denver Public Schools for over 30 years and a union member. My sister and I was a family of 4, and they had access to upward mobility. They could afford a home. I would like that to be a component 20 years from now, because that's definitely not an option for a teacher and a small business owner with 2 kids. They can't do that. I also would like to see democracy alive 20 years from now. Our voter turnout is abysmally low. If we can get up to 30% of registered voters to vote, that will be an accomplishment. So I would like to be sure that 20 years from now, our youth are leading the way in what an activated and participatory electorate looks like. And I hope that we address our sustainability issues now, because we don't have 20 years. We've got to be sure that we put people and our planet before any profit, so that our earth and our city is habitable then. And so I plan to take measures that are very bold and swift regarding climate change, and we'll accomplish that vision 20 years from now.
Same question, 1 minute now to answer for Deborah Ortega.
So 20 years from now, I would want to make sure that we continue to be a safe city, a city where people can walk through any of our neighborhoods, and that we have walkable neighborhoods where we're not riddled with traffic congestion just to move from one side of town to the other, that we have a transportation system that closes the gap on our first mile and last mile connections, and that we've got children in this city who have grown up and can still continue to live in the city that they grew up in. It's important that we ensure that jobs and livable wage jobs are an important part of what is available to them as part of them being able to stay and live in the city that they grew up in.
Johnny Hayes.
Thank you. I believe Denver is a very progressive city, and that we could lead the nation in some of our progressive ideas. One thing I'd like to see is Denver be a leader for civil rights for other cities. Something that's important to me, as I mentioned earlier, is the deaf community. I would like Denver to be the most deaf-friendly city in the world by educating our hearing people about deaf culture and deaf language, and encouraging deaf-friendly businesses and businesses to become deaf-friendly for the deaf and blind community. For transportation, I think we need to think outside of the box of creative solutions. One thing that I look towards is other cities. I know Mexico City, and I'm not saying that this is what we would do, but they added a cable car system that has had the added effect of the beautification to their city, and it also solves a lot of their traffic problems. So I'm thinking of creative solutions above ground, below ground, to solve these sort of problems for Denver. Thank you.
All right, next person to answer the question is Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Thank you. 20 years from now, I would like to see our historically black and brown communities preserved. We have historic districts that we are being gentrified and displaced out of. I would like to see us be able to remain in our neighborhoods and our communities and actually be able to thrive. My thing is equity, freedom, and justice. I think that Denver can be a just and progressive city, but we have to let these developers know and these corporations know that we are no longer for sale, and that you cannot just continue to run amok in our town. So that's one thing. And then transportation, we can start with stuff like streetcars. We can start with bus rapid transit. We can actually start with an affordable fare. I'm for free bus rides. It's cheaper to take a Lyft than it is to take the bus right now. And I use public transit on a daily basis. So that's one of the things I would like to see in the next 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. Same question for Robin Kinich.
I would look forward to walking through neighborhoods like Capitol Hill and seeing the historic buildings that have been preserved. Churches throughout the city that are landmarks in different communities are still there. And I would love to walk to every street that's a major thoroughfare and not have to look at a schedule before the bus arrives. And I want a sidewalk for every bus stop in every neighborhood in the city to get to that bus stop. I want people walking from all backgrounds along our safe sidewalks, children and seniors having access to green space that's within 5 minutes from their home. And I want to be able to make sure that we have growth that's happening around those transit areas or in major redevelopment areas so that the core of those neighborhoods and their character is preserved. And any new buildings match the format of the old community, whether it's brick or whether it's the setbacks, whether it's the fact that their roofs have a peak instead of being flat, but that the modern architecture is in the places that are new and that the historic character of our neighborhoods is preserved, along with affordability.
Thank you, Ms. Kinich. All right, the next question for our candidates, we're going to begin with Tony Pickford. With respect to the city's budget, what do you believe are the best investments the city is making now? And what investments or expenses would you like to see end if elected?
It's a good question. When I think about the budget, the first thing that I think about regarding should we spend more in a particular area or should we spend less is efficiency, just general efficiency. I think that we need to look at our budget and first eliminate waste. I don't think that that's being necessarily the approach that we're taking, and so I would accelerate audits of our existing budget and be sure that we're using our dollars and being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. I do think that the fact that we do have started to scratch the surface as far as an affordable housing fund is something that we definitely need to continue. I look at our budget almost doubling to over $2.3 billion, and there hasn't been much social return. So some of the things that I think that we need to curb or prohibit is some of the crony capitalism and our government officials working for developers and not the people of Denver. And so that's something that I would hope would change.
Same question for Deborah Ortega.
So I would continue to prioritize the delivery of basic city services that taxpayers expect that their tax dollars are paying for. Affordable housing is one that we have prioritized and put some resources aside to help address and basically leverage other dollars that come to the table to assist development partners in our city, both for-profit and nonprofit, and making sure that we are providing affordable housing that is desperately needed, particularly from 0 to 60% of the AMI. We have many working families that also cannot afford to stay in our city, and that is critically important. But just balancing our budget is another important part of the work that we do in reviewing the budget and making sure that it's not just priorities from the administration, but also priorities that have been identified by City Council that come from our communities.
Same question for Johnny Hayes.
Thank you. The things that I like is that there is money being spent and budgeted on the housing. If my numbers are correct, I think there's another $45 million that was added to the $55 million to deal with the homeless situation, and I'm happy that that's there, but there's always room for improvements everywhere. As far as what I'd like to see more balance in the entire city with the budgeting of schools. Even some things are outside of City Council's duties and whatnot, but I'd like to see the equitability in schools balanced a little bit better. I'm happy that there are funding for the arts, and I would like to see improvements in that area. The film industry is a thriving industry that wants to be in Denver, and I think there are things that we can do to encourage that. I'm not in favor of initiatives such as pay as you throw. I don't think it.
Apologize, Mr. Hayes.
That's okay.
Next up is Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Thank you. I would echo a lot of what Tony already said. I would like to see an audit of our budget. We don't know exactly where all our money is going. We have 26 homes we cannot even account for. We have a housing crisis in this town, and we have 26 homes we cannot even account for. And we found this out through the auditor's office. So we need to do better budgeting of our city budget. I would also expand on the Affordable Housing Fund. Right now it's for 10 years, $300 million. I would like to see it go up. And I would like to see us prioritize the needs of the community instead of the developers and corporations.
All right, Robin Kinich, your turn.
Every dollar we spend on helping a person exit homelessness into housing saves other costs to the city in quality of life, hospitalization. Every dollar we spend on the $37 million that you all approve for parks helps to clean our air and improve the quality of life. I would keep our investments going into renewable energy because they lower our energy bills and lower the impact on the climate from the air quality impacts of large buildings. Child care funding. We get an amazing return on investment as women and families are able to work when we provide support for child care. Each of these items is an example of how we get social capital back. We have a $105 million housing fund focused on those who are lowest. That's a bond that was done by DHA, all up front. Half of it will be for land for our poorest families. That will be an amazing return on investment because that stability is much cheaper than homelessness. What would I end? Any subsidies to businesses that pay less than a living wage. I voted against a Target subsidy because they
Your
wouldn't
time is
be
up, Ms. Kinich. I
qualified.
apologize.
you.
Lynn Langdon, you're next.
So currently, I think the housing budget being increased is definitely a plus. Obviously, I think we need to provide more housing, and a mix of housing is always important and ranges of prices. And also the current plans to complete our sidewalks and our infrastructure and continue to provide that for our city. I think I'm very happy with those plans. The things that I think really need to be focused on that have been neglected, obviously the homeless situation and those in our society who need rehabilitation in many different ways, whether it be addiction, just falling on hard times. It's something that I can relate to myself. I've been in a situation back when the economy crashed, and I was near homelessness. So I can empathize with that, and I'd like to establish more rehabilitation centers that encompass facilities that are all inclusive.
Thank you, Ms. Langdon. I'm going to have to cut you off. I apologize. We're going to go to question number 4. This is another question from our forum sponsoring organizations. And Deborah Ortega, it is your turn to start. What specific policies would you advocate for to prevent displacement of longtime residents and small businesses as demographics change and property values increase?
So this is a particular issue that I have worked on. I encouraged our administration to look at a program that Seattle has done addressing race and equity, so that when we are doing large or small projects in our city, we look at that from a lens of what does that mean to impacting the traditional neighborhoods that have been, historically in the area. This is something that is now happening. People in our city have been trained. We have over 100 people who have been trained to implement a program that is very similar to Seattle's, that is working on large projects as we're looking at 500 acres that will be coming into the I-25 corridor that will be mostly high density. We will be addressing displacement and gentrification of the neighborhoods to the west of that area. And this is very important because this ensures that people can afford to stay in this city with various programs and policies that we'll have in place.
Thank you, Ms. Ortega. Johnny Hayes?
Thank you. Specifically, the community involvement. I want to put in place things like good neighborhood agreements, but make them more effective, there be more accountability for those types of agreements. The community should have a say, neighborhood organizations should have a say of what's being put up in their neighborhood. These are the people who built these neighborhoods, who gave them the character, put the businesses in, and then attracted these outside developers to want to build there. So the community needs to be able to say, this is how we want to develop that. I think we do that through these agreements, through any legislation that could solidify the community's involvement by offering jobs to people within that community for that development, and being very specific about how those future projects move forward. And I'd also like to do that with protecting our businesses too. A lot of businesses have closed down, and I think we can do something about that.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Thank you. I would like to see a moratorium on the tax hikes, because right now our seniors are being displaced out of their neighborhoods that they helped build, that they helped create, and that they raised their children in. So I would like to see an expansion on the current moratorium that we have on senior tax hikes. That's one thing. Another thing would be a increase in the minority business contracts. Right now, it's very dismal. Denver Wright just did an article on it, and it's not looking good for minority businesses in this town. If we really want to preserve our diversity in this town, we need to increase the contracts for minority-owned businesses. And then my thing is, we need to get rid of the linkage fee or increase the amount of fee that these developers are paying to opt out of creating affordable units. So that is the three things I would implement when I get into office.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. Robin Kinich, you're up next.
Thank you. 3 anti-displacement policies I've already passed: an eviction prevention legal defense fund, a property tax rebate that's been expanded for low-income seniors and disabled folks and added families with children for the first time to help them with property taxes and stay in their home, and emergency rental assistance funded through the new fund that I helped to create. In the future, I'd like to work on business support that doesn't just rely on doing business with the city. Not every business has business with the city, but they need help finding new customer bases, they need legal support, and they need assistance with things like dealing with landlords and rent in their retail spaces. We should be passing new renter protections pending more permissions from the state legislature. And we can build a resident preference for a portion of units in our new housing to make sure that folks have a chance to live in new housing as it comes into the neighborhood so they can age in place in their own community.
Next up is Lynn Langdon.
Okay, so I think obviously it would be very important to make sure that we are implementing the current requirements and making sure that people are towing the line. And additionally, I plan on being very accessible to people and being out in the neighborhoods. And that is something that I just feel I want people to feel like they can come to me and I can hear from people directly as to what they want and what they desire in their own neighborhoods. So incorporating not just my ideas or a developer's ideas, but obviously the neighbors and the citizens of Denver is the key.
And Tony Pickford.
I think we need a major shift in resources. I'll give you an example. We have a $300 million affordable housing fund spread out over 10 years. City Council voted to increase everyone's stormwater fee. Basically, it was a tax increase disguised as a fee that raised more than $300 million for the Platte to Park Hill stormwater project. That's a problem. That's one example of why we've got mass inequity in a broken housing market. So we need to think about where we're spending our resources and not prevent those types of decisions anymore. Businesses, we got to be proactive with the engagement. I went on a small business tour, and a lot of small and minority-owned businesses have no idea who their city council people are or what their role is in supporting them. With residents, we've got to start with our youth. Education is key, apprenticeship programs. We've got to grow our own, and our youth are the leaders of today and not tomorrow, so we've got to support them so that they can live here for many years. And we haven't really started to use all the tools that we have to not displace residents anymore. Community land trusts are something we haven't utilized. The city is very slow in getting accessory dwelling units approved citywide, and so we need stronger leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Pickford. Your time is up. I apologize. And just a reminder that voters will be electing 2 council at-large members for this municipal election. All right, our next question for our candidates, we're going to begin with Johnny Hayes. Please identify what you consider to be the most significant crime problem in the city and what you propose to combat it.
So the most specific crime right now, I think, is how we are treating our disenfranchised citizens. Punishing people for losing their homes, for considering that a crime, for being out on the street and for suffering is something that I see as criminal, to act this way. As far as there was a program initiated that was able to pinpoint and recognize gunshots where they occurred and has a faster reaction time for the police force to get there. That is something that is obviously an issue in our city, and I think we could do more to recognize and then act on these gun crimes.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Jesse LaShawn Paris, you're next.
The most significant crime problem in this city is the criminalization of our unhoused neighbors. Since 2012, it's been illegal for you to survive on the streets of Denver. You could be arrested, ticketed, or harassed just for covering yourself with a blanket, a tent, a tarp, or a sleeping bag. I've experienced this firsthand because I am the only one up here that can say that I was homeless under this current urban camping ban. So we need to do away with this urban camping ban. We need to vote yes on 300. And if 300 doesn't pass, we need to pass a majority vote to repeal the urban camping ban. Thank you.
Robin Kinich, you're up next.
Thank you. I've heard many concerns from community members about the homicide rate in Denver, and that's serious. A lot of that has been driven by domestic violence deaths, and that's a serious concern we need to attack by supporting women and helping them have a path out. There are actually more suicides and more traffic deaths in our city than homicides. So as a public safety matter, we need to be addressing both of those issues, which are a little different than crime, but they're very much about public safety that's taking lives in our city. For traditional crime, property crime continues to be the most widespread in our neighborhoods, and that includes a lot of things that residents can control. I myself forget to lock the garage sometimes, right? Or I leave the car door unlocked when I'm running in to get my son from school. So we need to continually be re-educating our neighbors about how to keep themselves safe. And then we need to look at what's driving property crime, which is addiction. The more we can help people relieve their addiction by getting either clean, if that's something they're able to do through treatment, or substituting it with medication. For those on opioids, they often need a substitute medication to medically transition. That will help reduce property crime.
Thank you. Lynn Langdon, you're up next.
So a couple of my ideas would be a lot of people who were incarcerated and get released back on the streets, they find it hard to get reestablished into society and many times fall back into crime. So I think that is a percentage that we need to look at, and a lot of that is because when they do re-enter society, they're rejected on many levels. One of them being they can't find a place to rent. Many landlords won't rent to them. So I do believe going in and creating rehabilitation for these individuals and making sure and overseeing that they are assimilated into society correctly will help. I also believe addressing youth centers and keeping our youth going in the right direction is incredibly important.
Tony Pigford, you're up next.
I think that poverty is the greatest threat to our security. So a lot of crimes that we see in Denver come out of the root cause of us not addressing poverty. Our city government is broken, and until we start to address poverty and get people access to upward mobility, we're going to continue to see what I consider a lot of crimes of desperation. I like that the shot spotters were mentioned earlier. That's the approach our city has taken. Shot spotters, it's a very reactive approach. I'd like to solve problems before shots are fired versus being able to get to a location really quickly after they were fired, and that's going to take a lot of work with youth leadership development, apprenticeship programs, and being sure that our kids have opportunity so that they're not picking up guns, they're picking up books. Lower downtown is a mess. Down there where the bar scene, it's absolutely absurd that we've let that continue. We need to start talking about staggering the time that bars close so that all these folks aren't coming out of bars completely drunk and fighting and stabbing and shooting each other. So we need proactive leadership on city council to address these issues.
Thank you. Deborah Ortega.
So one of the issues that I think is criminal is the fact that we have people in our 80216 zip code living in the most polluted neighborhoods in the country. And the fact that we've had the Asarco lead smelter in that neighborhood that has impacted that community. We now will be widening I-70 that will contribute to the health problems that exist in those neighborhoods. In addition to that, you know, the opioid crisis is one that has challenged us with more and more people being impacted. I think some of our issues have been exacerbated with the legalization of marijuana and the fact that we have more people who have come here, and it has contributed to our homeless population that exists in our downtown. And I think it's important that we continue to look at how we address the issue of people who are living outside. I did not support our camping ban. Sorry.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we're going to begin with Jessie LaShawn Paris. What do you believe are the benefits of having 2 city council at large positions?
Denver's a big city. We are 11 districts total. So the benefits of having 2 city council at large opposed to 1 is we can split off certain parts of town that we can focus on. So that way we're not stressing ourselves out and working ourselves to the bone on one section of town or certain sections of town. We can split it up and get the community input opposed to just having one person doing all of this work. So the benefits of it is it helps us actually be able to effectively reach the communities that we are put into office to represent. We are public servants. We work for the people don't work for us.
All right, thank you. Robin Kinich, you're up next.
Well, it's been an honor to have the experience of doing this with Debbie Ortega. And what I would say is that people serve in different ways. Some of us lead with more policy work, others do more community-based projects. And the complementary nature of having those different approaches can really bring different things to the city. But at the same time, I've always been able to partner with Councilwoman Ortega, and we have worked together, for example, on getting apprenticeship training standards into all of our big construction contracts that you all approved in the bond, so that while we build buildings, we're also building careers. So that kind of partnership allows you to help to sponsor things that district council members are very supportive of at times, but may not always have the time to lead. It takes a lot of collaboration to work with stakeholders, other colleagues, and other council members, and I've found that the at-large seat allows me the ability to work on all of that. You can't touch every neighborhood in the city every single day by personally visiting, but using your communication methods, using newsletters, having phone calls, all are ways that you can complement each other.
Thank you, Ms. Kinich. Lynn Langdon, you're up next.
I think obviously having different perspectives, beliefs, and backgrounds and coming from those and playing off each other and having checks and balances is just always a good thing. But in addition, obviously being teammates and working together, fabulous. So I think that obviously it's important to be able to have us be incorporated in city council so we can work together with the other 11 members, but we could also be tiebreakers. Thank you.
Tony Pigford.
I've asked a lot of people a similar question on the campaign trail, and the answer that I've gotten is most people don't know the differentiation between the at-large seats or the district seats. So I think that they've been generally underutilized. The benefit of having 2 is they can work together to build a coalition on city council so that we can get to 7 or 9 votes so that we can have checks and balances. I think those 2 at-large seats are prime for that. I think that the at-large position should work with surrounding municipalities because a lot of our issues should be approached regionally, and with 2, you can really work with the surrounding municipalities to address these issues regionally. You would have a blend of 2 people with wonderful skill sets. So I look forward to, however this shakes out, working with somebody else in that at-large position to build coalitions so we have accountability. And also work with surrounding municipalities. And I look forward to blending my skill sets with another amazing at-large council person. Thank you.
Deborah Ortega.
District council members are expected to work on the projects that are within their districts, and their constituents, have them on speed dial where they often call them about not just growth and development issues, but basic things like a stop sign. At-large council members have the benefit of not only working with district council members and the issues that we get calls from within those neighborhoods, but also some of the bigger picture public policy issues. I've worked on the mitigation issues on the I-70 project, making sure that we're taking care of those families that are going to be left in the shadows of the I-70 project. Actually, it'll be under now instead of over. But working to address various issues like homelessness and affordable housing. For 8 years, I was the executive director of the Commission to End Homelessness and have worked with many of our providers to address those issues as well.
Thank you. Johnny Hayes.
Thank you. So As I mentioned before, I'm an historian. I'm specifically a presidential historian, and I think about the birth of this nation and how it was built on compromise. And compromise is not a dirty word. You know, different colonies got together with different representatives who had different ideas and different needs, and to build one solid nation, they decided to compromise. Not everything was perfect in that, but that's how great things happen. With council at large, we're put into positions where we are going to be forced to deal with things that are outside of what just specifically affects us and where we live. And having two people to deal with that just creates so much more diversity in that. I understand that people may have a first love for who they want as their choice up here, but if you care about things like the promotion of the arts, the encouragement of the film community, to have business here, deaf and blind communities, civil rights, mental health, along with dealing with the homeless situation, creative and forward thinking, then I ask you to consider me.
Thank you. Before the next round, we want to just thank the District 10 neighborhood groups that are sponsoring this forum, along with the Denver Decides partners. They are the Alamo Placida Neighborhood Association, Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods, the Golden Triangle Creative District, and Uptown on the Hill. Thank you, guys. Let's continue with round 7 of questions for the candidates, and for this round, we will begin with Robin Kinich. Your question: describe what you think are the benefits and or detriments of the rapid population and construction growth in Denver.
Well, the detriments have been that our infrastructure was behind when it began. So we didn't have the transportation in place or the land use planning in place, and we didn't have the equity policies as strong as we could have. We had a lot of legal barriers from the state legislature that are still making it difficult to require affordability in rental housing. And I think that those detriments have been experienced by our community as a quality of life challenge, both from the construction disruption itself and then for character of their neighborhood, where the growth didn't match the character. I do believe that some of the growing diversity that's come to our city in the form of new residents who bring new talents and passions to the city. I lived for more than 12 years in North Denver, and I noticed that there was certainly people of different backgrounds moving into a street that previously had been only folks of one background, and I thought that was a positive thing. I believe that business growth is an important piece of the success of the city, but it's not worth pursuing against those other factors.
Lynn Langdon.
Well, growth in any aspect is exciting, and always change is inevitable. So we're not going to be able to prohibit that, but what we need to really maintain is the small businesses and protecting them from the competition that moves in and maybe ends up they're not able to compete, and also making people feel inclusive, because we don't want our diversity and our citizens to feel like they're getting lost within this growth. So that's all that's very important.
Tony Pickford.
I think the detriments have been mass inequity. We're becoming homogenous. There was just recently some data that Denver is leading the country in pushing out the Latino community. The African American community is shrinking, and so I'm not seeing the diversity. We lacked foresight. We saw this growth coming, and we had an opportunity before, and leaders have had a chance to really impact these issues, so we don't have the mass inequity and lack of diversity. Benefits, I think, would be for the wealthy. If you have means and you are wealthy, Denver is a wonderful playground for you. Unfortunately, the wealth gap is drawn firmly along racial lines, and so that's why you see the homogeneous nature of our city. And so there's a lot of work we can do. Again, we need proactive, bold leadership so that we can make this city help it reach its potential. Thank you.
Same question for Deborah Ortega.
So I think the rapid growth has brought investment to our city. It's brought some exciting things like Meow Wolf. We have an amazing creative sector. $1.8 billion is what is generated from our creative sector in the Denver metro community. But with that, we also have challenges, and the focus on making sure that we are not just scraping homes and removing affordable housing within the fabric of our residential neighborhoods and looking at how we protect them is very important to just having the part of Denver that people love. It's our neighborhoods. And when we start removing that, we lose what is great and beautiful about our city. And with that, we see people wanting to leave because they see the changes happening in a way that make them no longer feel like it's their Denver. So those are some of the things that I think are important for us to hone in on.
Johnny Hayes.
Thank you. As far as the benefits and what diversity has brought here, it's in the industry, within the arts, within the film industry, within the music industry especially. Denver is an appealing place. People like this city. That's why they want to move here. That's why they want to be here. That's why we all want to live here. So we have there are certain things that we have kept up and progressed within those industries and other industries. But the cost is the displacement. People having to move further and further out from their homes that they grew up in, further away from their community, and also those small businesses that have been affected by that growth, by not having any protection that keeps them in business. If they've been there for 20, 30, 40 years, in some cases, they can just get driven out without any assistance and stopping from that from happening. So the displacement of people and the businesses is what's wrong.
Thank you. Next question, or same question rather, for Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Jesse, yes. So detriments to rapid growth, mass inequity, as Tony already stated, gentrification, communicide, displacement, ethnic cleansing, an increase in our homelessness population, and a lack of diversity. Benefits, white affluency, investment, tourism, and industry. The city seems to value tourism more than it values people. And my slogan is justice for the poor, people over profits.
All right, on to our next question, and Lynn Langdon, you will be the first to answer this one. What is your view on the role of historic preservation in the future of our city? What are your top 2 priorities to ensure preservation of historic buildings and neighborhoods?
Well, it's incredibly a priority to me because obviously, and I think to all of us, I mean, I think we've all said that, creating and preserving the history of Denver is essential. I myself on weekends enjoy and love going to the city park off of, it's near 17th and Colorado, and it's amazing that just walking around the park and enjoying the outdoors, but experiencing the history as well with the monuments and how we've incorporated some newer museums. I just, for me, it would be a priority to keep all of our historical incorporation with the newer technologies and the newer buildings and the newer neighborhoods. We cannot let that die because I think everyone enjoys that.
Tony Pigford, you're next.
I think my top 2 priorities, the first one will be to, be sure we're maintaining our historic designations in our neighborhood and maybe come up with a citywide policy around historic designation because it seems to be very different across the city. And then I also would really focus in on a program where we would repurpose buildings. We've got to think about our city and sustainability. When we're tearing down buildings and then building new ones, it's awful for our environment. And so my second priority would be to really do the research and dedicate a program to how we repurpose existing buildings versus scraping them and tearing down new ones because we've got to put our environment and sustainability first.
Deborah Ortega.
So the first really big historic project that I had a chance to work on as the council person of District 9 when I served as a council district member was the Lower Downtown Historic District. I was able to bring both sides together and come up with a compromise that ensured that those buildings in our downtown were going to be kept intact. And the investment that we made with $750,000 of a revolving loan fund helped preserve them. It is important to save part of the history of our city. And I serve on the board of a nonprofit. We have done that with a number of projects or properties in Northwest Denver. Those are the few remaining affordable housing projects in that part of town now in the Lower Highlands neighborhood. And the changes that we're looking at being made to the historic preservation ordinance are going to be really important to ensuring that we protect the housing stock in our city that is warranty of historic preservation.
Thank you, Ms. Ortega. Johnny Hayes, you're up next.
Thank you. Two things I'd like to do and see with this is, one, revisit what the qualifications are for historic sites, for historic landmarks, and help to preserve that. We've lost some things in the past that that could have been designated as historic sites, and so I'd like to look into that and also look at what other like short-term historic value we can put on certain things that don't meet the qualifications right now for an historic site. The other thing that I'd like to do is just put more of our budgeting into that preservation and making sure that that preservation is maintained. And I'd also think we can expand on that to what else could be historic sites, and budget into that the education so that people can learn and have the knowledge of what makes this historic, why it's important to us, so that we have a database we can go to and learn about these sites.
Next up is Jesse LaShawn Paris.
So my top 4 priorities would be historic preservation. As I stated earlier, I grew up in the northeast quadrant of the city, historically known as the Harlem of the West, 5 Points. And we had to fight tooth and nail just to make sure that our community was deemed historic. And now there is high-rise buildings going up right across the street from the sign, and it's been covered up. So my main focus would be maintaining that neighborhoods such as 5 Points, neighborhoods such as Sun Valley, neighborhoods such as Berkeley, etc., historically black and brown neighborhoods, Montbello, Park Hill, maintain their historic preservation and maintain their culture. And this can start by making sure there's education around the history. We have the Blair Cardwell in 5 Points. That is the
Thank you,
central
Mr. Paris.
site
I
of our
apologize.
history right
I
now.
have to cut you off. Robin Kinich, same question.
Thank you. I'm honored to be participating right now in an update to our landmark ordinance to add cultural criteria for the first time to eliminate some of the bias in the historic designation of just buildings kind of designed and built by white guys, so that we have, for example, important moments in Latino history or African American history that might not have the same famous architect involved also be acknowledged and designated. Second, we have a survey happening citywide called Discover Denver, and it helps us identify all the resources across the city so we actually know what we have now. With that survey, we can specialize folks who do renovations or improvements to those properties so that we can kind of keep them up in their same style. You already heard me mention churches. It's worth it to allow a little more building around a church to someone who agrees to keep that building and repurpose it so we can keep our historic churches. Thank you.
All right, this is our final submitted question, and we're going to begin with Tony Pigford. Do you support rent control to help rising rent costs in Denver? What other policies can we implement to curb Denver's increasing cost of living?
The rent control discussion has been interesting. I went to an affordable housing meeting at Manual High School, and some of our elected officials and council people showed up, and rent control came up. And the response we got from our city council people was they punted. They said that's a state issue. I think that city council folks have an obligation to be sure that our state capitol is more full of citizens than it is lobbyists, and so I am a supporter of rent control, and that's something that the state legislature has been looking at, but city council people have a role in all state legislation. We can't punt things to the state lawmakers. There's a lot of other things, when I mentioned earlier, levers that we haven't pulled. Community land trust, the city has actually fought community who wanted to create a land trust, accessory dwelling units citywide. There can be unique sort of co-op living arrangements, and so we've got to get creative. We've got to look at other things that have been implemented across the nation. And rent control is one of them, and I'm glad that the state legislature is looking at it, and city council needs to be involved at the Capitol in those discussions.
Thank you. Deborah Ortega, you're next.
So we were, in fact, doing what is referred to as rent control in our city before the Telluride ruling came down. I was the co-chair of our housing task force that created our inclusionary housing ordinance. And this ordinance was requiring anybody building in our city that was doing more than 30 units to include 10% at 80% of the area median income. And we were including rental housing, but the Telluride ruling basically said this is a matter of state jurisdiction, not local control. Until our legislators change that, we cannot do that with rental projects unless there is city financing in a project. And when we do have city financing, we are extracting affordable commitments from developers across our city. And that is important to addressing the needs of so many people in our community that can't afford to live here.
Next up is Johnny Hayes.
Thank you. So, city council and city government does have a history of working with the State Department, working with state legislation, and I believe they're currently doing that right now over an issue revolving plastic. And so, I believe renters need protection. Not only people who are renting a home, but businesses also, as well. So I do believe if we can work with the state level, then we could provide some sort of rent control, some rent stabilization, and some renters protection. I do know from my own experience, I did live in New York City where I received my degree. I saw the benefits that rent control and rent stabilization had, especially to the student population, and how that encouraged living and housing for students. Also, the improvements that come along with it, the responsibilities that building and housing owners have within that. So I definitely think that's something we need to look at and work with the state with.
All right, thank you. Jesse LaShawn Paris, you're up next.
Yes, I support rent control wholeheartedly at the state level and at the city level, but as has been previously stated, this is a state house issue, so we have to encourage our state legislators to push for rent control for the whole state and overturn the Telluride decision. I worked on many projects and organizations around rent control in the city. I support a warranty of habitability. I have been a victim of slumlords in the city, so I will advocate for that. I also support community land trusts, ADUs. We need to look at our group zoning. We need to change that. Right now it's illegal for 3 or more unrelated people to live in a house. So we need to revisit that. So as your next city council at large, I will look into all that, and I've already served on panels with Kinich and Debbie Ortega to look further into that.
All right, thank you. Robin Kinich.
Thank you. The limitation on rent control has stopped us both from doing inclusionary rental housing in the city, as well as from stabilizing rents for people as they live in a unit for longer. I have had many conversations with state legislators about the limitations and how they've impacted us in Denver. UNE, one of the key organizations supporting this bill that is proposed at the state legislature I used to work for, and I'm absolutely a part of shaping the current bill that's being shaped. In terms of housing policy, I worry a little bit that folks think that this one policy can solve all of our challenges, and that's not exactly true. I would absolutely support the ability to do inclusionary housing. I absolutely would support the ability to help stabilize rents as they go up. What I can't do is even if rent control passes, I can't pass a magic wand and change the price of all the apartments in Denver. I have to keep building new affordable housing. I have to keep giving people access to existing housing through rental assistance and vouchers and other ways that they get access. I have to keep them in their homes with property tax relief and the eviction defense.
Thank you, Ms. Kinich. Lynn Langdon, your turn.
Hi, I'm in agreement actually with Robin on this. I moderately support rent control. However, I don't believe that this is just going to solve all our problems and that people focus a lot on this. What I actually would like is for us also to focus on moving into the future that developers are providing a mix, constant mix, and more housing. Because obviously the more housing we have, when you have a shortage of housing, the prices go up. When you don't have a shortage and there's more housing options with a mix, the rents come down. So I think naturally we need to improve some of those things.
All right, well done, candidates. We're going to shift now into our lightning round. So you're going to have to control yourselves. You can only say yes, no, or pass on these questions.
We have a minute to decide.
No. That's called the lightning round.
Minute to
Okay,
decide.
so no expanding, and we're going to return to our ballot order, so we're going to begin with Jessie LaShawn Paris. Okay, here we go. Do you support Initiative 300, the Right to Survive initiative?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Neutral.
Do you support purchasing and maintaining more portable restrooms for the public's use?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 Do you think approval of the Denver Right plans should be postponed until after the election?
Yes.
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 Pass.
In the 5 years since it was legalized, have you personally tried any of the various products offered by recreational marijuana stores?
Yes.
Pass.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Are you in favor of safe injection sites in Denver?
No.
Yes.
Yes, with a caveat.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Was the salary and benefit package that comes with the job of being on city council a factor in your deciding to run for office?
No.
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 Do you support the continued use of tax incentives to recruit firms to relocate to Denver?
No.
No.
It depends.
Pass.
Not so much.
Rarely.
We've strayed from the format. All right, have you attended your neighborhood association meeting in the last 6 months?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Close, maybe. Yes, not sure.
Did you participate in the recent Denver Right planning process?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes.
If you were not running for office, is there someone sitting at the table that you would vote for?
If I was not running for office, Tony.
Oh, are we supposed to say? Or we just...
Yes.
Yes, you get leeway on this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
I'm voting for me.
Yes. Debbie Ortega.
Yes, Tony.
Pass.
All right, that's our lightning round. Let's give them a hand. You've survived. All right, now it's an opportunity for you guys to ask each other questions one-on-one. So you'll select an opponent who you want to answer the question. Hopefully they will answer it. So we will go in ballot order again. So Mr. Paris, you may ask one of your opponents a question, and they will have 1 minute to answer.
Okay. Debbie Ortega. Is it true that we had to go to the city to get tiny home villages because the city was not making it a priority?
So do I get to elaborate?
Yes, you have 1 minute.
Okay. Yes, the zoning code did not have a provision that allowed for tiny homes, and so it required some massaging, if you will, of how to allow this to happen and to make sure that health and safety was being addressed as part of the tiny home village. And as you all know, it's a site they've had to be moving around to different locations. I'm on a group home task force that is looking at changes to our group living ordinance, that is looking at creating some language that would allow the permanent existence of tiny homes at various locations in the city.
Johnny Hayes, your turn to ask an opponent a question.
Thanks. I think I'm going to ask you a question too, Debbie. So we both have an interest. I think we're coming from a similar place when it comes to the film industry and what we'd like to sort of see in Denver. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about what kind of ideas you'd like to do to promote that sort of permanency or business?
Thank you for that question. This is actually an issue that I have done some work on. I worked on trying to create a 5% rebate to the film industry where they would have to spend the money up front and at the very back end after they completed a project and we saw their financials, very similar to what happens at the state level, then we would be able to rebate 5% back to them. This would bring our film industry back. We were the first state in the country to have a film commission, and right now, the business goes to other states that offer these incentives, and it brings significant investment to our city. So that is something that I would continue to push to do, and I've actually asked our mayor's office to reconsider this 5% rebate.
Debbie Ortega, it's your turn to ask a question.
I want to ask Tony a question about why is it important for all of us to know where Tier 2 facilities are in our city, and who should they be reporting to?
You're talking about SCFD Tier 2 facilities?
No, I'm talking about Tier 2 facilities in our city that store various hazardous materials for their business operations.
And your question is, why is that important, or who do they report to, and why is that important?
Why is it important to know where these Tier 2 facilities are, and who should they be reporting to?
Gosh, I think about the damage that's being done to our environment, and I'm not sure who is tracking those Tier 2 facilities, because we've got one of the most polluted zip codes in the country. Suncor, although it's in Commerce City, has been allowed to expand production without city council members attending those meetings. And so I think it should be the role of city council and the mayor's office to know where those hazardous facilities are, and there is nothing more important. Look at Houston right now. We've got the second oil refinery already going right now, I think, that's causing a lot of damage in Houston. I'm concerned that we've got hazardous materials sites in Denver close to residents, mostly black and brown and poor folks, that aren't being treated with the urgency or even made publicly aware. As a citizen, I don't know on city council, nobody has told me where these facilities are, and I think there needs to be more transparency and accountability along those lines.
All right, Tony Pigford, it's your turn to ask a question.
Councilwoman Ortega, your response to the Save Open Space Denver candidate questionnaire about the future of Park Hill Golf Course open space indicated that you would be willing to consider allowing some development on the land, despite the fact that the city paid the Clayton Trust $2 million in 1997 for a perpetual open space conservation easement. Please explain to the voters why the city should be willing to consider tearing up a perpetual open space conservation easement covering this parcel.
So first of all, the fact that we do have the conservation easement on that property means that we should not be revisiting the reuse of that site. This was a discussion that was taking place when the Clayton Trust was talking about trying to sell that land, and many of our neighborhoods were very involved. I know INC was actively engaged in this conversation, and having the open space in our community is vitally important to our neighborhoods across the city. And as you all know, the voters passed an initiative last year that will allow us to have more green space in our city. And as we're seeing more new growth and development, we want to make sure we have enough open space, very similar to what we did when we built the Central Platte Valley and looked at how much green space we wanted, as opposed to just saying it should only be 10% of the development that's coming into that area.
Lynn Langdon, you may ask an opponent a question.
Okay, Tony, since you and I are the only at-large candidates that signed the ban on fracking, I would like to ask you to explain the importance of that.
Yeah, arguably the issue that should be on the top of everyone's list is climate change. And I got a lot of pushback. I got 21 different candidates to sign a pledge to ban fracking as we were watching the bill go through the Capitol to get local control with the oil and gas regulations. I think we need to be proactive. There is nothing more important for our future than to address climate change in swift ways. Again, it comes down to people and planet before profit. Fracking is one of the worst things that we can do. They can drill horizontally for almost 2 miles. We've already had the threat of fracking coming into the Stapleton area out in DIA, and so it is imperative that we address climate change and public safety at the top. It should be at the top of our priority list. So I thank you, Lynn, for being one of the 21 courageous candidates who said that if we got local control, that we would explore the option of banning fracking in perpetuity in Denver.
Robin Kinich, you may ask a question.
Thank you. Jesse Paris, the LGBT, the gay, lesbian, and transgender community has had a lot of very painful experiences with therapists trying to change someone's gender or change someone's sexual orientation, a lot of very harmful psychological impacts, and this therapy has been disproved. When council proposed a ban on this practice, you voted, you came and you testified very vociferously against that ban, and I'd like you to talk about why it is that you believe that parents should be able to subject their children to this type of therapy.
Okay, well, I knew this was coming. So the reason why I opposed it is because what was not being mentioned and was not being brought up was the fact that a lot of these children have been molested, have been sexually abused. I deal with a lot of LGBTQ community with the homeless, and I've heard personal testimony and stories from members of this community that this has happened to them, and that was not discussed, and that is the reason why I opposed it.
All right, we have another one-on-one opportunity round. So candidates, you can once again choose one of your opponents and ask a question. And we're going to go in ballot order again. So Jesse LaShawn Paris, do you have a question for an opponent?
Yes. Debbie Ortega, you've been in city office for the past 30 plus years. What have you done to mitigate any of this displacement, gentrification, and rampant displacement of people of color in this town?
So I have not actually served as an elected official for 30 years. It will be 24 years by the end of this term. So as I mentioned before, I am on the board of a nonprofit housing development organization that has been building affordable housing across our city. They oftentimes do get resources from the city to help build that housing and make sure that we are serving many of our most vulnerable communities, our veterans, people who are chronically mentally ill, people who have been formerly homeless. And as a council member, I have both brought forward legislation and have supported legislation that has worked to not only address affordable housing, but has worked to ensure that we have the resources that work with our homeless population, that we have enough shelter beds in our city, that we're working to address the needs of struggling families trying to stay in this city and creating affordable jobs for them.
Ms. Ortega. Johnny Hayes, you can ask a question if you like.
Sure, I have questions for everybody, so I'm trying to think of who I want to ask next. I guess so. So Tony, my nephew goes to your school, so I think of you as an education man. Within your experience through education, what's the biggest difficulty that you've seen, experienced, or witnessed from the government level dealing with education, and what would you like to see done about that, or what would you do about that?
Thank you for that question, and it's been a pleasure to be at the boys' school and work with so many amazing students and families. I think, again, it goes back to poverty being, ultimately the greatest threat to our national security and our security in Denver. And government policy has a lot to do with exacerbating inequity and, increasing the levels of poverty. So each and every day I work with students and families that come from backgrounds of poverty and trauma. And as much love that we pour into these families and these students when they're coming from, cycles of poverty that go back generations, and our city isn't doing enough to give our children access to upward mobility and generational wealth, it makes our job extremely challenging. Thank goodness for all the teachers out there, my wife included, who's been a teacher and union member for 12 years. So I think that we need to elect people this election who will really focus on upward mobility, generational wealth, and being sure that neighborhoods are safe so that we can prepare students and families before they get to those school doors. And I look forward to doing that as one of your City Council at-large representatives.
Deborah Ortega, do you have a question?
I have a question for my colleague, Councilwoman Kinich. What is your approach to a strong mayor form of government in addressing local issues?
Thank you. So you already heard that one of my mantras is be prepared to say no when you have to. So 41st and Fox, Target subsidies. I also actually voted against the entire budget because I didn't believe the accountability was where it needed to be yet for the new housing fund. So sometimes you just have to say no to the administration. Other times, you have to be prepared to not accept no for an answer. So, for example, when we couldn't get support for an eviction defense fund, we raised dollars from our actual office budgets, which are pretty small, but we collectively put them together and created an eviction defense fund. I also had to raise private foundation dollars for an economic study for a housing policy that the administration didn't want to partner with. So don't accept no for an answer. And then lastly, work with them when you can, because there are enormous resources and expertise. Creating a new housing fund, it took us a while to get the administration on board, but once we did, we were able to work with them and their enormous amount of resources to get the legal, technical help we needed to get the fee in place, to follow all the steps we needed to get the property tax, which is very complicated under Tabor.
All right, thank you. Tony Pigford, do you have a question?
I do for Councilwoman Kinich. City Council declined to investigate the sexual harassment claim of Mayor Hancock. I would like to know what you have done specifically to ensure that this never happens again in our city government, and so that subordinates who are sexually harassed have some sort of recourse. What have you done to address that issue?
I helped to draft the majority of the policy that the City Council adopted to hold itself accountable, and that included reaching out to experts on sexual assault and women's issues to make sure that they specifically weighed in and provided numerous language changes to our own policy. We also have an approach that we are working on now to consider whether we can adopt an ordinance that would help to sync up all the departments. We have one executive agency that has not yet adopted their own policy to ensure that there is an internal investigation process for all branches of government. The charter provides some limitations on our ability to control other branches of government. Only Congress can impeach a president. Our city council did not have that power, and we had an enormous set of state laws that protected confidentiality of certain information and provided us a path. One of my obligations as a council member is to make sure that I'm not knowingly violating the law. When you swear in, you have to swear an oath, and you can't do something without the signature you need to make sure that your city attorney signs off on it without placing the taxpayers at risk. I didn't want
Thank
to
you,
risk
Ms.
your dollars.
Kinich. Lynn Langdon, do you have a question?
Yes, it's for Ms. Kinich, Councilwoman Kinich. One of the things I heard a lot of the people who were speaking directly to me say that they were concerned about with you was, why do you accept campaign donations from developers?
I have had no problem voting against folks before they give, while they're giving, after they give, and I can give specific examples. I've had no problem voting against a cable company who contributed to my campaign when they didn't have the diversity plan that they needed for their rollout. I had no problem supporting a cable franchise that another donor didn't want me to support. I've voted against developers regularly. They opposed the linkage fee that I passed. They have opposed inclusionary housing changes that I've made. They repeatedly oppose my policies, and so I've had no problem taking a pretty strong path in terms of my ability to vote independently, regardless of who the contributions are from.
Robin Kinich, you may ask a question.
Great. So Councilwoman Ortega, you mentioned a little bit about toxic chemicals, and you've had a passion for rail safety. I know you've spent a lot of time on that. I'm curious kind of what you feel the outcomes have been in terms of promoting rail safety for some of the communities that live close to the rail going through our city.
Thank you for that question. As we are expected to see more development, a lot of that is adjacent to rail. And this is particularly important where we have cargo that carries hazardous and flammable liquids. We spent 6 months with a process that was spearheaded by Fire Chief Tade that helped us look at what are we doing with existing development to ensure those communities are safe? And what are we doing with new development that's coming in to address creating some kind of buffering? We now have a checkbox that is on the design review, development review, and the rezoning process that will ensure that developers are doing their part to address the safety. For existing developments, we are working with our Office of Economic Development, our Local Emergency Planning Committee through the Office of Emergency Preparedness that is working with the managers of buildings. The Central Platte Valley is one of those neighborhoods that has asked for this kind of support.
All right, candidates, now we move to our closing statements. You will each have 1 minute for a closing statement, and we're going to reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we will begin with Robin Kinich.
Thank you so much to our hosts and to all of you who are here watching on Channel 8. Tonight I've shared some of my accomplishments, and I'm running for re-election to build on those accomplishments and grow the impact on the lives of the people in this city. You've heard how important it is to me that we preserve the history of our city while ensuring that growth has a conscience. That conscience needs to include affordability. It needs to include open space. It needs to include very important high environmental standards that protect our climate. And it needs to include transportation that helps us all move around more efficiently and improves our quality of life. I believe that I have been a partner, and you've heard about how I work collaboratively to get the things that I work on done. I've been proud of collaborating with council members and communities, including those who've walked in shoes that I haven't, like communities of color I've worked with on police accountability, and like those who have expertise that I don't. I need each of you to govern, and I look forward to your vote so that I can be your at-large person again. Thank you.
Lynn Langdon, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you so much to everyone here. It's been wonderful, and I'm honored to be in the presence of all these people running. I have spent the last several weeks knocking on doors, meeting people in the streets, getting to know them face to face, and introducing myself. I've listened to each person's perspective and heard the issues they felt needed to be addressed. Every signature for my nomination I got myself. I met them directly and in person, and I did so because it was important to me that I be accountable and present for the citizens of Denver, whereas others had people get the signatures for them. I intend to go through my term, and I intend to be accessible to the people. It's of utmost importance to me. I'm also the only candidate not taking money from any special interest groups, developers, or other people. And I'm doing this so that I can be 100% available and make decisions based on equality for everyone. So
Thank you. I'm sorry you're out of time. Tony Pigford, you're up next.
Thank you. This has been fun. I appreciate it. I'm running for Denver City Council at large out of moral conviction, not any personal ambition. Community service came with my breakfast cereal growing up, and I, like my ancestors, have a unique skill set where I'm a blend of an entrepreneur, an educator, and a social justice warrior. I've already led some citizen-led legislation and campaign finance reform in 2E. I was one of the 5 people to get that going, and also the Let Denver Vote ballot initiative, which will give Denver voters a say if any public funds should be spent on any future Olympic bid. I used to sit with my great aunt, and she would have knee to knees, where she would sit down when I was a little boy, and she'd pour a glass of scotch, and it was called a knee to knee because our knees would touch. And she would say, Tony, if you want to solve any problem, you've got to get down with the problem. It's about proximity. That's exactly how I'll co-govern with the community. I will have knee to knees with people in Denver so we can create the most just, equitable, and vibrant city in the country. Vote for Tony Pigford May 7th. Thank you.
Now a closing statement from Deborah Ortega.
So I've been looking out for the taxpayers' interests in the city and county of Denver, and I will continue to do so with your support. I sounded the alarm when the proposed fracking was scheduled to come at Stapleton and was successful with the help of the residents from Stapleton in stopping that. I have worked to protect the neighborhoods of Globeville, Lyria, Esponcia regarding the impact of the I-70 project. I have been monitoring the environmental cleanups in this area. I'm your neighbor. I lead in that way as being a neighbor, and I will continue to expend my time and my resources from my office in addressing the needs of our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods are what make Denver unique and beautiful, and we need to continue to protect that. I'm continue to addressing the growth in our city and doing that in a way that addresses it
Thank
with
you,
equity.
Ms. Ortega. I apologize to cut you off. Johnny Hayes, you have a closing statement.
Thank you. First of all, as I mentioned before, I understand if you have a first love up here and who you want to vote for, but think about who's going to work with that person, because you get to vote for 3 council members. You get to vote for 1 for your district, and you get to choose 2 of us up here. So what I would say, if we're all working on similar issues, but if also like promotion of the arts, encouraging the film industry to thrive here in Denver, if the deaf community is important to you, civil rights and mental health, along with what we're dealing with homelessness and the growth, creative and forward thinking and transportation solutions, along with affordable living and government accountability. If those are issues that are important to you as well, then I ask for you to consider voting for me for City Council. Thank you very much.
And finally, with his closing statement is Jesse LaShawn Paris.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out today. Thank you to everybody that put this whole thing together. As your next city council at large, I will continue to champion for our most vulnerable communities, our homeless, our black and brown populations, and our poor populations, to create a just and equitable and inclusive Denver we can all be proud of for generations to come, where we feel at home and not as strangers in our own neighborhoods and communities. We need bold new leadership, and who will stand up to developers and corporations and be accountable to the community and co-govern with the community. I am the only candidate who is not brought and has personally been affected by the policies this current council has passed. And I'm the voice of the voiceless, the voice of the homeless, and the black and brown communities. And actually, your vote on May 7th, Jesse for council, I'm on top of the ballot. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the candidates. We have a fabulous audience here tonight, and you guys get to have a voice, so to speak, by showing your appreciation for our candidates. Thank you guys for being here. Also, our thanks to the Denver Decides partners, which include the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, the League of Women Voters of Denver, and Historic Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. The forum today is also sponsored by the Alamo Placida Neighborhood Association, Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods, the Golden Triangle Creative District, and Uptown on the Hill. Our thanks to all of them as well. We also want to thank the staff and management of the Denver Art Museum for their assistance and cooperation. We hope we have given you a fair look at each candidate vying to represent the entire city of Denver as one of 2 at-large council members for Denver City Council. And for a complete look at all of our information online, you can go to denverdecides.com. I'm Wendy Brockman. Thanks for joining us.